There is a moment in the Exodus story that has troubled readers for centuries. The Bible says Pharaoh hardened his heart, but it also says that God hardened it. Which one was it? If Pharaoh chose rebellion, that is understandable. He was a king defending his power. But if God strengthened his resistance, then why? Why prolong the suffering? Why allow plague after plague to strike Egypt, instead of ending the confrontation immediately? This was not just a spiritual disagreement. It was a clash between the most powerful empire of the ancient world and a nation of enslaved people, with no army and no influence. Each plague weakened Egypt. Each sign demonstrated power. And yet, instead of surrender, something inside Pharaoh seemed to grow firmer, colder, more immovable. Was this divine control? Or was it the exposure of a heart that was already hardened? To understand this, we must look beyond the surface of the story, beyond the miracles, beyond the drama, because the hardening of Pharaoh's heart was not an accident. It was central to what God was about to reveal. Before Moses ever returned to stand before Pharaoh, the outcome had already been spoken. God told Moses that Pharaoh would not listen, that his heart would be hardened, and that through many signs and wonders Egypt would come to know who the Lord was. When Moses and Aaron first appeared before Pharaoh, they delivered a simple request: let the people of Israel go into the wilderness to worship. Pharaoh responded with defiance, asking, "Who is the Lord that I should obey his voice?" Instead of granting freedom, he increased the burden of the Israelites, forcing them to gather their own straw while producing the same number of bricks. The first sign came publicly, when Aaron cast down his staff before Pharaoh and it became a serpent. The magicians of Egypt did the same by their secret arts, but Aaron's staff swallowed theirs. Still, Pharaoh's heart remained hardened. Then Moses stretched out his staff over the Nile, and the river turned to blood. Fish died, the water stank, and the Egyptians dug along the riverbank searching for drinkable water, yet Pharaoh's heart did not change. Frogs covered the land, entering houses, bedrooms, ovens, and kneading bowls. Pharaoh summoned Moses and promised to release the people if the frogs were removed. But when relief came, he hardened his heart again. Dust became gnats throughout Egypt. The magicians failed to reproduce the sign and said, "This is the finger of God," but Pharaoh would not listen. Swarms of flies filled Egyptian homes, while the land of Goshen was spared. Pharaoh attempted compromise, offering permission to sacrifice within Egypt. But Moses refused, and when the flies were gone, Pharaoh hardened his heart once more. Dire plague struck the livestock of Egypt. Horses, donkeys, camels, herds, and flocks died, yet not one animal of Israel perished. Pharaoh confirmed it but remained unmoved. Boils broke out on man and beast, and the magicians could not stand before Moses. The text states that the Lord hardened Pharaoh's heart. Hail fell from heaven mixed with fire, destroying crops and servants left in the fields. Pharaoh confessed his sin and asked for prayer, but when the storm ceased, he hardened his heart again. Locusts devoured what remained. Pharaoh's officials pleaded with him, but after negotiating and refusing full release, the Lord hardened his heart once more. Darkness covered Egypt for 3 days, a darkness so deep it could be felt, yet the Israelites had light. Pharaoh offered partial release, demanding the livestock remain, but Moses refused. One final plague was announced. At midnight, the firstborn in Egypt died. From Pharaoh's house to the prisoner in the dungeon, and a great cry rose across the land. That night, Pharaoh summoned Moses and commanded Israel to leave immediately. The Egyptians urged them to depart quickly. After generations of slavery, Israel left Egypt, yet God instructed Moses to turn back and camp near the sea, so Pharaoh would believe they were trapped in the wilderness. Once again, the text declares that the Lord hardened Pharaoh's heart. Pharaoh gathered 600 chosen chariots and pursued them. The Israelites stood between the sea and the approaching army. Fear spread through the camp, but Moses told them to stand firm and see the salvation of the Lord. The pillar of cloud moved between the two camps, and through the night a strong east wind divided the waters, making a path through the sea. The Israelites walked on dry ground with walls of water on their right and on their left. The Egyptians followed into the sea, but at daybreak Moses stretched out his hand and the waters returned, covering the chariots and horsemen. Not one remained, and throughout every confrontation, a pattern had repeated again and again. Pharaoh's heart had been hardened. To understand why Pharaoh refused repeatedly, it is important to consider how kingship functioned in ancient Egypt. In the era most commonly associated with the Exodus setting, Egypt was ruled by pharaohs who were not viewed merely as political leaders. Royal ideology presented Pharaoh as the guardian of order, often described through the concept of Ma'at, the principle of balance, justice, and cosmic stability. Pharaoh's role was to preserve harmony against chaos. His authority was not simply administrative, it carried religious weight. Egyptian inscriptions consistently portray Pharaoh as chosen by the gods, empowered by them, and victorious over disorder. He was seen as the visible representative of divine authority on earth. In such a framework, yielding to the command of an outside deity would not be a minor concession. It would challenge the ideological foundation of royal power. Another key cultural element concerns the concept of the heart. In ancient Egyptian belief, the heart was regarded as the center of intellect, will, and moral decision-making. It represented a person's character and inner resolve. During mummification, the heart was typically left within the body because it was believed to be weighed in judgment in the afterlife. When the biblical narrative speaks of Pharaoh's heart being hardened, it addresses this deeply embedded concept of will and determination. In Egyptian royal language, expressions such as strong of heart or firm of heart were associated with courage, endurance, and authority. The imagery of hardness would have resonated within that cultural vocabulary. There is also a practical dimension. Egypt functioned as a dominant regional power with organized administration and military strength, including chariots and trained forces. A sudden release of a large labor population would have had economic and strategic consequences. Seen in this broader historical context, the confrontation described in Exodus reflects not only a personal dispute, but a direct clash between competing claims of ultimate authority. The tension within the Exodus narrative has led to centuries of theological reflection. If the Lord hardened Pharaoh's heart, how can Pharaoh still be held responsible for his refusal? Jewish interpreters addressed this question early in rabbinic tradition. Many noted that in the first plagues, the text often states that Pharaoh hardened his own heart. Only later does the wording shift more decisively to, "The Lord hardened Pharaoh's heart." Some rabbinic sources suggest that Pharaoh's repeated resistance established a pattern of willful defiance. The divine hardening that follows is then understood not as the creation of rebellion, but as a judicial confirmation of a direction already chosen. Christian theologians have also wrestled with this balance. Augustine argued that divine hardening does not inject evil into a person, but involves the withdrawal of restraining grace, allowing an existing disposition to manifest fully. In this view, God remains sovereign without becoming the author of wrongdoing. John Calvin later emphasized that divine sovereignty and human responsibility coexist in the narrative, even if the precise mechanics of their interaction remain beyond complete human explanation. Modern biblical scholarship often observes that the text alternates deliberately between statements that Pharaoh hardened his own heart and statements that the Lord hardened it. This literary pattern preserves both agency and sovereignty within the same account. The stated purpose within Exodus is also significant. The repeated hardening is connected to the declaration that the Egyptians shall know that I am the Lord. The narrative frames the confrontation as a public revelation of authority, not merely a private struggle. In this theological reading, the hardened heart magnifies the signs. The signs display power. And through that display, identity is revealed. To Egypt, to Israel, and to the reader of the text,